Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. It is time to talk about it. And this one is going to be really difficult to do because there's so much to say about it. And I want to talk about too much. So I'm going to try and rein it in, but we'll see. I will be using my Signet copy for page numbers, and this one is a little bit over 1,000 pages. So let's get started. So we start with a part 1, The Shadow Before, and it starts with chapter 1, After the Flood, 1957. So we are in the year 1957. We meet two children, George and Bill Denbrough, and they are brothers. They're quite young. Georgie is 6, and Bill, who stutters, and they'll occasionally refer to him as Stuttering Bill, he is 10. There has been extreme flooding. Bill is homesick with flu, and he is not well enough to go out with George, so they make this paper boat together, and George ends up sailing it alone down the street, so, you know, should be safe for him to do so, but it ends up not being safe. And their relationship is so cute, and they interact with one another in this very brief scene of the boat creation. It's almost as if they know that this is the last time they will see each other. There's that undercurrent, and it's very touching, very sad, especially if you know what happens, and it's very heart-wrenching to read it every time. Now, in order to seal the boat, Bill wants paraffin, and he sends George to go get it from the cellar. The power's out because of the storms and the flooding and all that, and George has this just deep-rooted fear of the cellar, and it's so relatable. Like, if you've ever been afraid of your basement, you will feel for George having to go down there, having to worry that something might grab you. He at one point goes down, runs back upstairs, realizes that his shirt is untucked, and knows that that's going to be his downfall. The thing that lives in the basement is going to grab his shirt and yank him back. Just the whole thing is so relatable. Quote, smells of dirt and wet and long-gone vegetables would merge into one unmistakable, ineluctable smell, the smell of the monster, the apotheosis of all monsters. It was the smell of something for which he had no name, the smell of it, crouched and lurking and ready to spring, a creature which would eat anything, but which was especially hungry for boy meat. Page 6. And this is the first mention of it as a monster, and like I said, it's a universal fear of the basement. You run downstairs, you grab something, you run back up, and hopefully escape your fate. They seal the boat. George goes down the street, sailing it. It ends up shooting down the road in a big rapids into a storm drain. So he goes and he looks in the storm drain, hoping to retrieve the boat, and he sees yellow eyes. Yellow eyes. Quote, there were yellow eyes in there, the sort of eyes he'd always imagined but never actually seen down in the basement. Page 12. And it's a clown. I personally have never had a fear of clowns, but I do have some friends and relatives who are terrified of them. So I don't know if their fear comes from this or if there's something else, something more primal. Then there's a priceless exchange between George and Pennywise. They are, getting to know one another because George says he can't accept a balloon from a stranger. And Mr. Bob Gray, or Pennywise the Dancing Clown, introduces himself and says, well, now we're friends, basically, now it's okay. And George can smell the smells from a carnival, a circus. All this stuff is coming from the storm drain. Quote, and yet, under it all was the smell of flood and decomposing leaves and dark storm drain shadows. That smell was wet and rotten, the cellar smell. Page 13. So, George reaches for his boat in the balloon and Pennywise rips his arm off. He dies, and that's kind of where we leave the past for now. I love that this book goes between the 50s and the 80s. I really enjoy that in the book, and I'm glad they carried that over into what I would call the true It movie, the miniseries with Tim Curry as Pennywise. Chapter 2, After the Festival in 1984. The police are listening to the eyewitness testimony of a man whose lover was thrown over the canal and killed, and the people who he said did it. So there are all these cops and all these different rooms, all these different people involved. So they were at a festival celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the building or the opening of the canal, which is a big part of Derry's culture. It helped them with their economy, all this stuff. It's a big deal. And the two of them were leaving one of the carnival days, and there were exchanges. One of the guys is very homophobic, and he was kind of insulted and was possibly somewhat closeted himself, and he and his friends ended up kind of stalking these two gay men. But basically they're a whole bunch of juvenile delinquents, I think there are 3 or 4. 3 of them, who beat the shit out of Adrian, chucked him over the side of the canal, and he dropped. And Don saw a clown under the bridge, and he saw the silver eyes, which are not yellow here, they're silver. And one of the perpetrators, Chris Unwin, also saw the clown. Quote, "The clown was dragging Adrian out on the far side with one arm. Its balloons were in its other hand. Adrian was dripping, wet, choking, moaning. The clown twisted its head and grinned up at Chris. Chris said he saw its shining silver eyes and its bared teeth. Great big teeth," he said, page 33. Nothing was said about the clown at the trial because people were concerned that if anyone mentioned this clown, there would be doubt, and then these 3 horrible boys would not be charged. Now, chapter 3 is very lengthy. This is called 6 Phone Calls, 1985, and we are only going to talk about the first one because I think doing too many is going to make it too long of a video. So, number 1, Stanley Uris takes a bath. And this chapter is the most visually disturbing. It is something that stuck with me from the movie, and reading it, there are more layers every time I read it, because the first time I read this I was quite little. I was, not even a teenager yet, and the older I get, the more disturbed I am by what happens to Stanley and what his wife goes through. So it is the most upsetting one of all the phone calls. Stanley has been reading Bill Denbrough's books, and his wife had tried to read them, but she found them to be kind of like Stephen King books, concerned with monsters and like werewolves, vampires, that kind of thing, and she didn't like it. Quote, "The book by Denbrough, the one she tried to read and then put aside, was about werewolves. Werewolves, shit. What did a man like that know about werewolves?" Page 41, which we'll find out later. He actually knows some stuff. Stanley and Patty have been married a long time. They live a mostly charmed life. Like, everything kind of falls into place for them. Stanley has these insights that he can't explain, but he always chooses the right thing and gets in on the ground floor of stuff so that his pathway to success just comes easily. So his wife was looking at a whole bunch of job applications for a teaching job, and none of them looked any more promising than another, and Stanley just kind of pointed at one and he was like, "Oh, this one, this is the one you want." And it ended up being the perfect fit, the perfect job, perfect amount of money, all this stuff. So this just happens throughout the course of their married life. They do not have children, even though they both want them. And I love that there's a room that they share, so it's kind of like a shared office space, and it's going to eventually become the baby's room if they ever have one. Quote, someday that room would belong to Andy or to Jenny. Page 47. And I just love, I don't know if it's intentional, but it's a little nod to Rosemary's Baby because she was going to name her baby Andy or Jenny, and maybe that was not intentional at all, I don't know. But I like the little connection. So the 28th of May is the night of the bath, as Patty is referring to it in her mind. And it's just so tragic. They are watching TV. Stanley gets a phone call, and he is at first confused, like he doesn't really either recognize the voice or he doesn't remember who the person is exactly, and then he kind of falls into, oh yeah, I remember, hi, how are you, long time no see. And it falls into like an easy conversation. Patty, who had been kind of curious at first, turns her attention elsewhere, back to the TV. She's also doing some sewing. She starts paying attention to that instead of the phone call. I really, really want to know what the other side of this conversation is. We never find out. And I don't know, something about it, like the things that Stanley says, I'm like, well, what is Mike saying to him? The person who's calling is Mike Hanlon from Derry, Maine. And did I even mention that the story takes place in Derry? It does. See, there's just so many things that I assume I've said or that people know. This takes place in Derry, Maine. It's my favorite of the Derry books. So anyway, Mike is telling Stanley all this stuff, and we have a vague understanding of what it is, but we aren't sure. He seems very despondent after the phone call, kind of like he is disassociating, and he excuses himself to go take a bath. Patty, after the show is over and the credits are rolling, starts thinking, well, you know, that was kind of weird. Maybe I should go check on Stanley and see what that was about. So she heads upstairs, and the bathroom door is locked, which she says is not a thing that happens in their house. And she stands outside the door, not knowing what to do, afraid of what's inside. She can hear a drip coming from the faucet, just a steady dripping noise, and that's it. Stanley doesn't answer her. Stanley doesn't indicate that he is in trouble. Nothing. Just nothing. And the feeling that she must have had is just awful. Awful. I can't even imagine that situation. You're alone in the house. A closed, locked door. You know, she finds herself downstairs trying to call 911. She ends up like, how did I get here? What am I doing? She hangs up, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what to say. You know, my husband locked the door. Like, what do you do? So she remembers there's a spare key for the bathroom. She goes and gets it, heads upstairs, and she's just rationalizing all this stuff in her mind. She's like, well, if I walk slowly, it'll be fine, nothing will happen. And she stands outside the door, fumbles with the key, gets it into the lock, unlocks the door, opens it, and Stephen King just describes the scene so vividly. And he even mentions that the lighting in the bathroom is very fluorescent, very bright, harsh, unforgiving. It is impossible to look and you know, not see things that you don't want to see. You can see everything, and he emphasizes that. So Stanley is in there. He is in the bath. The faucet is dripping, and the water's pink from blood. He has cut his entire arm from wrist to elbow on both arms, and then slashed across the wrists. So he's made these large capital T's down his arm. That was one of the most disturbing things for me when I was little. I was just like, damned. Not even just slice your wrists, but to like cut down the arms and the wrists. And then he had dipped his finger in his blood and written it, just capital I, capital T, on the tile above the tub. And his poor wife, his poor wife, I just, I don't know, when people kill themselves and someone else has to discover them, someone who is attached to them, loves them, is going to go through the abandonment and the trauma and the sadness, the imagery that will stick with them forever, you know, that kind of thing. It feels so bad for people like that. I don't know. I feel like their relationship was so sweet and cute that he really fucked it up at the end. And so at this point, we don't know why he did this. We don't know anything, really, which is part of the beauty of the story. It's hard for me to get back into that mindset of not knowing. But yeah, that is where we will leave it